Michael Davis, a former addict in Texas, rebuilt his life by helping others at a community center. When a fire destroyed it, he thought his purpose was lost, until the people he'd helped came together to give him a new start, showing the power of second chances. Hi everyone, welcome to Life Unveiled. Let's get started. Michael Davis sat on the steps of the burned-out community center in Austin, Texas, staring at the charred remains of what had been his lifeline. At 41, he'd come a long way from the man he'd been a decade ago, a heroin addict who'd lost everything to his addiction. Back then, he'd been homeless, sleeping under bridges, his family refusing to speak to him after he'd stolen from them to feed his habit. His parents, hard-working people who'd raised him in a small house on the outskirts of Austin, had tried to help, but Michael's addiction had driven a wedge between them. He'd taken money from his mum's purse, sold his dad's tools, and even pawned his little sister's bicycle, all for the next fix. By 2013, he was a ghost of the boy who'd once played football in high school, dreamed of becoming a mechanic, and made his parents laugh with his silly impressions at the dinner table. In 2015, Michael hit rock bottom. He was 32, living on the streets, his body frail and his mind clouded by withdrawal. He'd lost touch with his family, his friends, everyone who'd ever cared about him. One rainy evening, he stumbled into a soup kitchen, his hands shaking as he clutched a tattered coat around his thin frame. A social worker named Karen spotted him in the crowd, her eyes kind but firm. She handed him a cup of coffee, the warmth seeping into his cold fingers, and said, "You're worth more than this, Michael." Those words cut through the fog in his mind, a small spark of hope in the darkness. Karen sat with him, listening as he poured out his story, his shame, his regrets, his fear that he'd never be more than an addict. She didn't judge him, didn't look away. Instead, she offered him a spot in a rehab program, a chance to start over. Michael hesitated, the pull of the drug still strong, but something in Karen's voice made him say yes. Rehab was the hardest thing Michael had ever done. The first month was a blur of withdrawal. Sweats, shakes, and nights where he screamed into his pillow, the cravings tearing him apart. But Karen visited every week, bringing him books to read, encouraging him to keep going. "You're stronger than you think," she'd say, her voice steady. And slowly, Michael started to believe her. He spent a year in the program, fighting every day to stay clean, learning to face the guilt of his past without running from it. He wrote letters to his family, apologizing for the pain he'd caused, but they didn't respond. It hurt, but Michael understood. They needed time, and he needed to prove he'd changed, not just with words, but with actions. After getting sober, Michael knew he wanted to give back. He started volunteering at the East Side Community Center, a small, run-down building in a rough part of Austin that offered free meals, job training, and support groups for people struggling like he had. At first, he just swept floors and served food, keeping his head down, unsure if he belonged. But the center's director, a gruff but kind woman named Ms. Clara, saw something in him. "You've got a story, Michael," she said one day, handing him a mop. "Use it to help others." Those words stuck, and soon Michael was doing more than cleaning. He started running support groups for addicts, sharing his journey with raw honesty, his voice steady as he told them, "If I can do it, you can too." He helped kids with their homework, taught job skills to adults trying to start over, and listened to anyone who needed to talk, his presence a quiet strength in the chaos of their lives. The center wasn't much, just a few rooms with peeling paint, a leaky roof, and a heater that rattled like it might give out any day. But to Michael, it was home. He'd found purpose there, a reason to stay sober, and a community that became his family. By 2023, Michael was a different man. He'd been sober for 8 years, had a small apartment with a bed, a table, and a few plants he'd grown to love tending, and was studying to become a certified counselor. The center had grown under his care, with more people coming every week for help. He knew everyone's story. Sarah, a single mum who'd escaped an abusive relationship and now worked as a nurse. Jamal, a teenager who'd stayed out of gangs thanks to Michael's mentorship. And Linda, a grandmother who'd learned to read at 60 with Michael's patience. They called him Coach Mike, a nickname that made him smile every time, a reminder of the man he'd become. Michael's days at the centre were long, but fulfilling. He'd arrive early, unlocking the doors at 7 a.m., the air still cool as he swept the front steps. He'd make coffee in the tiny kitchen, the smell filling the space, and set out chairs for the morning support group. People would trickle in, some with tired eyes, others with tentative smiles, each carrying their own burdens. Michael greeted them all by name, his voice warm. "Morning, Sarah. How's the new job?" he'd ask. Or, "Jamal, you finished that art project yet?" He'd sit with them, listening as they shared their struggles, offering advice when he could, or just a nod when words weren't enough. In the afternoons, he'd help with job training, teaching people how to write resumes or practice for interviews. His patience endless, even when someone got frustrated and walked out. By evening, he'd tutor kids, his voice gentle as he helped them with math or reading, their laughter a bright spot in his day. But on a cold January night in 2024, disaster struck. Michael was at home, asleep in his small apartment, when his phone rang at 2 a.m. It was Ms. Clara, her voice shaking. "Michael, the centre, it's on fire!" He threw on a coat and raced to the scene in his old pickup truck, his heart pounding as he drove through the dark streets. By the time he arrived, the building was engulfed, flames licking the sky, the air thick with smoke. Firefighters were already there, shouting orders as they sprayed water. But Michael knew it was too late. The centre was gone, reduced to ash and twisted metal. He stood frozen, watching as the place that had saved him burned, his chest tight with grief. Firefighters said no one was hurt. The building had been empty, but the loss hit Michael like a punch to the gut. The centre had been his anchor, the place where he'd rebuilt his life. And now it was gone. The next morning, Michael sat on the steps of the burned-out centre, his hands shaking as he stared at the wreckage. The air smelled of smoke, and the ground was littered with debris, charred papers, broken chairs, a child's drawing half burned but still showing a stick figure family under a bright sun. Michael picked it up, his fingers trembling, and felt tears sting his eyes. "I've got nothing left," he muttered to himself, the weight of failure pulling him down. He thought of all the people who had depended on the centre. Sarah, who'd found the courage to leave her abuser after joining the support group. Jamal, who'd stayed out of trouble because Michael gave him a safe place to go. Linda, who'd cried with joy the first time she read a full sentence on her own. What would they do now? What would he do? The centre had been his purpose, his reason to get up every morning. And without it, he felt lost. The old whispers of addiction creeping back into his mind. Word of the fire spread quickly through Eastside. By noon, a small crowd had gathered at the site. Sarah, Jamal, Linda, and dozens of others Michael had helped over the years. They brought coffee, blankets, and food, their faces full of concern. Sarah, now a nurse with a steady job, knelt beside Michael, her hand on his shoulder. "We're not letting this stop you, Coach Mike," she said, her voice firm. Jamal, now 19 and working as a graphic designer, nodded, holding up his phone. "We've got a plan," he said, his eyes bright with determination. Linda, her grey hair tied back, handed Michael a thermos of tea, her voice soft but steady. "You've given us so much, Michael. It's our turn to give back." Sarah had organised the group, and they'd already started a crowdfunding campaign, sharing Michael's story online, how he'd turned his life around and helped so many others do the same. Jamal made a video about Michael's impact, showing photos of the centre's better days, kids laughing at a talent show, adults hugging after a job interview, Michael smiling as he handed out certificates at a graduation ceremony for the job training program. The video included interviews with people whose lives he'd changed. Sarah talking about how Michael's support group gave her the strength to leave her abuser. Jamal explaining how Michael's mentorship kept him off the streets. Linda reading a passage from a book, her voice proud as she said, "Coach Mike taught me this." The video ended with a plea. "Help us rebuild the Eastside Community Centre, the place that gave us all a second chance." The campaign took off faster than anyone expected. Within a week, they'd raised $50,000, enough to rent a new space and start rebuilding. Local businesses pitched in too, donating supplies and furniture. A hardware store owner named Greg, whose son Michael had mentored, offered to help with repairs for free. "You saved my boy," Greg said, clapping Michael on the shoulder, his voice thick with emotion. "He was heading down a bad path, but you gave him a reason to stay straight. This is the least I can do." Even Karen, the social worker who'd first helped Michael, came back into his life, offering to connect him with city grants to keep the centre running long term. She met Michael at a coffee shop, her eyes crinkling as she smiled. "I always knew you'd do something amazing," she said, handing him a folder of grant applications. "Let's make sure this place lasts." By spring, the new Eastside Community Centre opened its doors. It was bigger than the old one, with fresh paint, new computers, and a proper kitchen for meals. Michael stood at the entrance on opening day, a ribbon in front of him, the crowd cheering as he cut it with a pair of oversized scissors. Tears welled in his eyes as he looked at the people who'd made it possible, his community, his family. "I thought I'd lost everything," he said, his voice breaking as he spoke into a microphone. "But you all showed me I was never alone. This centre isn't just a building. It's us, all of us together." The crowd erupted in applause, and Michael felt a warmth in his chest he hadn't felt since the fire. The new centre became a hub of activity. Sarah started a parenting class, teaching other single mums how to navigate the challenges she'd faced. Jamal taught art to kids, his laughter mixing with theirs as they painted murals on the walls. Linda read stories to preschoolers, her voice steady and proud, her eyes shining with joy. Michael finished his counselling certification, and the centre became a model for community support in Austin, even getting a feature on the local news. A reporter interviewed Michael, asking how he'd kept going after the fire. "I didn't," he said, his voice honest. "They did. Sarah, Jamal, Linda, everyone. They reminded me why I started this in the first place." Michael's life blossomed in ways he never expected. He reconnected with his family, his parents finally ready to forgive after seeing the man he'd become. His mum, a quiet woman with grey hair, came to the centre one day, her eyes teary as she hugged him. "I'm so proud of you, Michael," she said, her voice trembling. His dad, a gruff man who rarely showed emotion, clapped him on the back and said, "You're a better man than I ever was." Michael's sister, now a teacher with kids of her own, brought her family to visit, and Michael played with his nieces in the centre's new playground, their laughter healing wounds he'd carried for years. Looking back, Michael realised the fire hadn't destroyed his purpose. It had shown him how much he'd built. He'd given others a second chance, and when he needed one, they'd given it back. His story spread through Austin, inspiring others to reach out, to help, to believe in redemption. Michael kept a photo of the old centre on his desk, a reminder of where he'd started, and next to it, a new one of opening day, with everyone smiling around him. On tough days, when the work felt overwhelming or the whispers of addiction crept back, he'd look at those photos and remember why he kept going. Because sometimes the life you save by helping others ends up saving you in ways you never expected, a ripple of kindness that grows into a wave of hope.
If you enjoyed this story, drop a like and subscribe for more tales like this. Hit the bell, and we'll catch you in the next one.